something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Every time we stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat.
Revelation 8. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea, and had life, died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed.
And Stephen Benoon here with Israeli News Live. And friends, listen just for a moment here. I have kind of avoided getting into the subject of asteroids and things like that. Getting into this subject of asteroids here on Israeli News Live, because we have so many things that change. It's just like war. It's very fluid. And I say fluid because they can talk about an asteroid going to strike the Earth, but yet we have technology that we're able to steer them, we're able to destroy them. A lot of things can change before an impact occurs, and this is one reason why the government never really tells us about what's coming. A lot of different reasons for that. I did, though, last night, I released a video on Patreon about 3 different asteroids that are coming our way this year, and I was very careful in that video to explain that we are actively working to try to chip away at them, move them out of orbit, things like that, so that they don't hit the Earth. So in that respect there, I would say there's not any major cause of alarm. But at the same time, if they are unsuccessful in their campaign on this one particular asteroid, it's going to hit the Pacific subduction zone, which is going to trigger the fault line and the quakes for the Cascadia, things like that. It's going to be catastrophic if we can't manage to get this thing off course or break it apart. And they are actively working on breaking it apart. So I want you to be aware of that. They are actively working on it. Our Patreon channel, you get more information about this. I go into more details about it. I don't want to say too much here, just mainly because it's not always received very well. And like I said, and it's because things are always changing. Initially, and just to give you an idea of that change, initially this asteroid was supposed to hit near Cuba, and but because of them trying to chip away at it, they have knocked it out of its orbit to some degree, and it's shifted, and now it's going to the subduction zone there in the Pacific Ocean. It is big as of right now, and I don't have a time frame for it as of yet, but I know it's this year. At least that's what I've been told initially. And all 3 of them, they're traveling together. There's more than 3, but the 3 that are supposed to impact the Earth are all traveling together. They're not planet killers, nothing like that. But because of the subduction zone, they do believe that it's going to cause the faults to go off at the Cascadia, and we could end up seeing some major quakes.
The purpose of the DART mission is to take your spacecraft and you ram it into an asteroid to change the orbit so it won't hit the Earth. Asteroid impacts that are big enough to cause damage and cause real problems are rare, but the stakes are really high. So the problem in an asteroid impact is that the Earth is going around the sun, an asteroid is going around the sun, and they both want to be in the same place at the same time. It's been over the past 20 years that planetary defense has started to be taken seriously after an impact into Jupiter by a comet in the mid-90s, and this impact into Siberia, I think, also opened a few more eyes. In 2016, the Planetary Defense Coordination Office was set up in NASA to demonstrate that we can do something about an asteroid impact if something is coming in. A nuclear device, for a long time, it has been the only tool that people have considered. But the concern with dispersing an asteroid is that now you have 2 or 5 or 15 things, and the pieces aren't that much smaller. What we want to do is understand those orbits for all the asteroids that might come close to the Earth. Then it becomes a matter of picking the new orbit you want for the asteroid and then changing its speed. If you have 20 or 30 years to do that, then you only need to change the speed by a millimeter a second or less, and then it'll miss the Earth entirely. The purpose of the DART mission as a whole is to test how this technique of a kinetic impactor would work if we ever needed to use it to deflect an asteroid.
So DART is launching on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket in July of 2021. So DART is launching on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket in July of 2021. So DART is launching on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket in July of 2021.
At the request of Science Mission Directorate, SMD, senior leadership, a risk assessment was performed on the DART project scheduled to determine the viability of the primary, July 21, 2021 to August 24, 2021, and secondary, November 24, 2021 to February 15, 2022, launch periods. Based on the results of this assessment, SMD determined the primary launch period is no longer viable and has directed the DART project pursue their secondary launch window. The DART project is currently working with SpaceX and NASA's Launch Services Program, LSP, to identify the earliest possible launch opportunity within this secondary window.
Seven, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Falcon 9 with the DART mission on the way for humanity's first ever planetary defense test mission.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
T plus 33 seconds. SpaceX launch engineers seeing a nominal conditions on Falcon 9 as we begin the trip to space carrying the DART spacecraft. M1D engines about to begin throttling down.
Power and telemetry nominal.
We're throttled down. Avionics calls out good power on the vehicle.
Vehicle is supersonic. Max Q.
We've gone supersonic. We're through the period of maximum dynamic pressure. And the Merlin 1D engines have throttled back up to full power. We're out of the throttle bucket. From here on, even though the velocity is rapidly increasing, the atmospheric density is decreasing, and so the loads are decreasing now on the Falcon 9.
NASA's DART mission has a sequel, how Europe's Hera will explore an asteroid impact aftermath. Hera will arrive at Didymos with 2 CubeSats that will make the first ever measurements of an asteroid interior. The Hera mission will arrive at Didymos 2 years after DART's impact. Image credit, ESA. The European Hera mission will follow NASA's DART asteroid, deflecting spacecraft to the binary space rock Didymos and detail the aftermath of DART's collision with the smaller of the 2 asteroids, Dimorphos. It will even attempt to peek inside the asteroid duo in a scientific first. According to the European Space Agency's, ESA, original plans, Hera would have witnessed DART's suicidal encounter with Didymos moon Dimorphos in 2022 firsthand, but initial hesitation among ESA's member states led to funding delays. As a result, this investigator spacecraft will only arrive at the scene more than 2 years after the cataclysmic impact. The dust will have settled at that point, and astronomers will have known from Earth-based observations whether DART achieved its goal of altering Dimorphos' orbit around the larger Didymos. What else will be there for Hera to learn? Surprisingly, quite a lot. Astronomers know very little about Didymos and its moon Dimorphos, and the information Hera will gather will help researchers fin it in a possible future mission that would aim to deflect an asteroid on a collision course with Earth.
And they are actively working on breaking it apart. So I want you to be aware of that. They are actively working on it.
Something is going to hit the Earth again. There was an impact in Siberia within the last decade that was caused by an object about 20 meters across.
It broke up in the atmosphere and created a big shock wave. It was 10 times the size of the Hiroshima nuclear explosion.
It injured about 1,000 people in the town of Chelyabinsk.
Of course, if you imagine this happening with a greater population density.
And approximately 45 years ago now, I came home one day from work, stayed up that night in prayer, and then went to sleep. The very next thing I knew, I was standing in front of a very brilliant light. Somehow I knew that I was standing in front of God. I also knew that He had shown me some things, and that at one point even a scroll had unfolded, and I had watched vivid images. I wake up and I write them down. An example that most of the world knows about now was in 2010, when I saw dark clouds rising over the Vatican, and woke up and wrote down that Pope Benedict XVI was going to retire in April of 2012. Started talking about it publicly. In fact, came on Sid Roth's It's Supernatural and talked about it in 2011. Made that prediction. 2012 came and went, and at first it did not appear that Benedict had resigned. But then, as the world knows now, in February of 2013, the Vatican made an announcement. Pope Benedict XVI has resigned. He has retired. And that same day, the Vatican's media outlet, the El Observatore Romano, gave an interview with the New York Times journalist in which they admitted that Pope Benedict had actually, officially, secretly resigned his position at the Vatican in March of 2012, and then in April of 2012, it became official with the Curia, the Roman government, and they accepted his resignation. And now, of course, my phone was ringing off the hook. Everybody, everywhere, wanted to know who my insider at the Vatican was, right? Who had been feeding me this information. And I laughingly, of course, today say that if I told them that it was the Holy Spirit, that would really confuse them. Approximately 1 year ago, this experience that I've had all through my adult life happened again. And I was actually on the top of a mountain somewhere, and I was surrounded by thousands and thousands of people. And everybody was in a panic. Everybody was screaming and running and looking back over their shoulders, including me. And that part of the vision for me was the most frightening and the most real, because so far as my mind was concerned at the time, it was actually happening. And I remember turning and looking back over my shoulder, and I could see this giant burning mountain that was coming through the atmosphere, breaking apart as it raced towards the surface of the earth. And as we were all running, all of a sudden, this stone fell into the Pacific Ocean. It knocked all of us off of our feet. The whole planet felt to me like it was shaking, vibrating so roughly that we could not stand up. And I heard this horrible cracking sound, as if literally the mantle of the earth was breaking apart. And again, I looked back over my right shoulder and I saw this giant tsunami, a massive wall of water that was coming up over the top of this mountain. And I knew that we were all getting ready to perish. And just then, as if two large hands came down underneath my arms and lifted me up into the air, so that now I was looking down on the planet. And it was horrible, it was terrifying, as this water was rushing over the top of all of these desperate people who were screaming and crying and praying. And I watched something that only later did I understand was actually the science of, I'm not a scientist, so I only could write down what I saw and then later verified this is exactly what scientists say would happen. As the waters of the Pacific Ocean, where this stone, this massive burning stone fell, were boiling, and the aerosol that was coming up off of this water moved up into the upper atmosphere, and a whole series of hurricane movement started moving across the hemispheres of the earth. And then a second very large part of this stone that had broke off of it evidently as it entered into the atmosphere impacted the earth and ignited a series of volcanoes. And all of this material was being blown up into the upper atmosphere and getting caught in the jet stream and was moving around the earth, and very soon, within a period of days, darkening out much of the sun and the moon and the stars. And then I woke up. I was so terrified, I literally almost fell out of bed and grabbed a sheet of paper, which I've learned to keep next to my bed with a pen, and I started writing down all of the minute details, blow by blow, of what I had seen and what I had experienced. But before I could do that, it was as if a voice in the room spoke and uttered a single word, and that was the word Apophis. Now, I knew that there was an ancient Egyptian god of chaos by the name Apophis, which was the enemy of light, the enemy of Ra. I knew that. I didn't know a lot more about it than that. And I also knew that NASA had discovered an asteroid at the Kitt Peak National Observatory in 2004. And at the time, they named it Apophis after this Egyptian god of destruction. And at that time, they actually speculated that there was enough of a serious chance that Apophis was going to impact the Earth in 2029 that they put it on their watch list. Later on, they decreased the chance that it's going to impact the Earth in a bit over 9 years from now. But I learned later that this is probably because they're involved in a cover-up, and that the chances of Apophis striking the Earth in 2029 is far greater than what they're admitting at this point. And by the way, in the book, I go into that. It's more than a conspiracy theory. I've interviewed and talked with astronomers, members of NASA, people with above top secret security clearance. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon, who was a senior analyst there, put me in contact with impact specialists. People like Nathan Myhrvold, who is constantly listed in the top 100 critical thinkers, scientific thinkers in the world, a true polymath with over 800 patents to his name. He once ran the science department at Microsoft. One of the most brilliant men on earth has recently published a peer-reviewed paper in an astronomy magazine in which he accuses NASA of an absolute cover-up of the threat that is posed by both Apophis and some other asteroids. So I did all of this research and came to believe that, in fact, of all dates, Friday the 13th, April 2029, Apophis is going to strike the Earth. Now, the facts around this asteroid are astonishing. It is 370 meters wide. 1,200 feet wide. Or to put that into more of a mental gymnastic, it's 4 NFL football fields wide. It weighs an estimated 20 million metric tons. It is traveling at 28,000 miles per hour. And if, as I predict, it impacts the Earth in 2029, it is literally going to be equivalent to, scientists say, 65,000 atomic bombs the size of the ones that we dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of World War II that literally sunk the Japanese island. They say that at a minimum, tens of millions of people will die, and possibly billions of people are going to die. NASA says that if this rock does hit the Earth, it's going to come down probably around the border of Mexico and California, so a highly densely populated area. So you can understand why this was such a terrifying vision to me. However, when Luke speaks of the signs in the asteroids, when the book of Revelation talks about what will happen in chapter 8, when this mighty rock called wormwood, which is what I believe this is, falls upon the planet, it all precedes a moment in which believers are to look up and lift up their heads because their redemption is drawing nigh. It is a message about the imminency of the second coming of Jesus Christ. And if you are a rapture believer, then of course you know that you're not appointed unto wrath, and you probably won't even be here when this event happens. But it is coming, and it is an opportunity, regardless of your eschatological or prophetic worldview, for believers of every type to take this as a moment to be preachers of the gospel. Paul said, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power, the dunamis, the dynamite of God that can convert from the Jew to the Gentile. And that is what I hope the message that is contained in the book, The Wormwood Prophecy, will do. Ignite a passion, because I did see in this vision as well, people everywhere, all around the world, on their face, begging God to deliver them from this menace. And there is a precedent in the scripture for God averting a judgment like he did with Nineveh when Jonah preached there. Like he says in the book of Joel, if you will turn to me with all of your heart and soul and mind, he says, then the locust plague won't come. I will send you a blessing instead of a cursing. And even one of the most famous European astronomers in the world today says there is a very real chance that Apophis will go through what he calls a window between Mars and Earth and be slingshot out into space, only to return exactly 7 years later.